Hello and welcome to Not Your Forte Podcast, a new music education podcast geared towards helping music ed students successfully prepare for both their classwork and for once they're getting ready to go out and teach. I'm Eric Tinkler, a fourth-year music education student here at Kansas State University, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Phil Payne, the lead advisor for all music ed students, as well as the director of the music ed division here at K-State. And we're very glad to welcome you here. Thank you so much for all who have listened to previous episodes. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive right in and talk about motivation and self-care. Let's get to it. Dr. Payne, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm surviving. We're getting to the meat of the semester here.
You know, we're a little over the third of the way through the semester, which is crazy that it's gone this fast. But hitting the middle third, we start to feel the stress, right? And so let's talk about, like, from my end of it as a professor. You know, for us, I've had two major deadlines, and so one part of our job is to share what we do, share what we know, what we found out, and so through our research, we have to go out and present our findings and share that with our colleagues. And I've had two major deadlines this week.
So
and actually,
even the teachers
today,
have the homework deadlines and stuff like that too.
Absolutely. So and they work at multiple levels, right? So we have deadlines that we have to meet with our department heads. We have deadlines that we have to meet with university officials. You know, so for instance, someone like me, I've got reports that have to go in to our department head on various committees that I'm on. I'm the chair of another committee, and so I have to make sure that the paperwork gets through so that courses can be offered, those kinds of things. And then, you know, these deadlines of having to go to these presentations, you know, and so we feel just because we've graduated doesn't mean that the deadlines go away.
Oh yeah. And I saw the emails about the advising appointments being sent out. I'm sure you're ready to meet with all of us.
Absolutely. Well, and that's another source of angst, right? And so in the middle of all of this, as a student, you're sitting there going, all right, I think I already have to enroll for next semester. I mean, we're 6 weeks in, and now it's all of a sudden, by the way,
semester already.
Yeah, we've got to push and make sure that you're all ready to go. So this is the time where we have to be aware that things can snowball. And so I think this is really a big timely topic that we can chat about. How do we stay motivated? How do we not let the snowball catch up to us? And how do we stay 1, 2, 3 steps ahead in this process? And how do you prioritize?
And just as the month of October kind of gets here and stuff like that, I look at my calendar and the schedule. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a lot. Like marching band, we have 4 straight weeks of performance, and that includes Friday night obligations, and Saturday I'm a tuba player, and the 11 a.m. games start at around 2:30 a.m. for us, because we like to go to breakfast. It's fun, but it's a long 14+ hour day with everything we have to do, and then concerts are going to start at the end of the month. I already have a few papers I have to write, midterms, like just kind of like talking about it and thinking about it right now is like, oh man,
it starts to make you anxious.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try and do, and this might be something especially for all music ed majors, is when you put together your calendar, try to be aware as possible of everything that's going on in your students' lives. So whenever I sit down and I make a calendar for one of our courses, I'm hyper aware of what all is happening. And I try to bend the schedule as much as I can to account for that. I'm also flexible in terms of due dates. You know, just because I understand that you have a 14-hour day, and so if the students are proactive and they come and talk to me ahead of time and they say, look, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get this on time. Is there a way that I can get an extension? I'm totally open for that. And I build in the extra time in my syllabi to allow for that flexibility. So now, with that being said, there's also this moment Where from the student's perspective, there's only so much pushing back that you can do.
Yeah, and I think like knowing your professors, especially when you're taking like general education courses and things like that, teachers you're not as familiar with, I find always kind of like talking to them, seeing like whether they're going to be very strict about their deadlines, because there will be some teachers that'll be that way, or if they're going to be kind of more on the lenient side of like, yeah, I know you're busy, you're a band kid or something like that. I know some professors have said that. It's like, yeah, I know you're in the band, I know what you go through, you're okay. But some teachers are like, it's deadline 11:59 p.m. has to be in, not a minute later.
Well, and that is a great thing to know and to find out early on in the semester. So we talked about in one of our earlier podcasts about making a planner. Well, when you're making a planner, one of the things you want to find out is you want to talk to those teachers ahead of time and know that if it's a fall course, that we're going to have run-ins with our schedules, especially mid-October to the end of the semester. So why not talk with your professors up front and say, okay, how are you in terms of flexibility on deadlines? Here's what my schedule looks like. Mm-hmm. And if you're proactive and you show that you're not being reactive and a product of the moment, then your professors are going to be much more favorable for you, because they're going to say, okay, that person's taking initiative. The other side of it is, like you said, you may run across a professor that says, no, these are the deadlines. You know what that does? Then that automatically sets your prioritization first, like, right?
Get that done on time.
Exactly. So you understand where the flexibility is, so you can actually prioritize. Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about procrastination. What I'm talking about is I need to get A done first. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on B, even though it's not due for another week. I understand that, but I'm going to do a little bit on it. And so if you look at trying to knock things out little by little and not try and do entire projects or entire assignments in one sitting, that's where stress starts to happen.
Especially you think about everything you have due like the next day and you haven't started anything. It's 9:00 at night and you're just. I've had those moments where I'm just sitting there at my desk. I'm like, I don't know where to start nor what I can do.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can say is that, and this helped me through grad school, it helped me with my dissertation, is don't look at it as a whole. Don't look at it big picture. Because if you start to look at it big picture, it's going to be overwhelming. And what happens when things get overwhelming? We get stressed. And when we get stressed, our anxiety goes up. And we tend to withdraw. We tend to pull away. And we tend to say, I just can't do it. I got to pull away. Now, all of a sudden, we pull away. And then another deadline gets stacked on top of it. And then at that point, we're underwater.
We're buried.
Right. So one of the things that... part of this planner making that we talked about in the first episode, and what I'd like to come back and talk about, is that whenever you're making your plans, don't try and say, okay, I'm going to work on this project today. Say, I'm going to work on this section of the project. So if you break it into chunks,
it's a little bit more manageable.
It's much more manageable. Think about it in baby steps and say, okay, I'm going to get this done. And I can so for instance, let's say you're writing a 10-page paper for a music history course, okay? You may not be able to write the full 10 pages in one night. People try it, highly unsuccessful, but they try it, but it doesn't work. But if you know, all right, tonight, my whole thing is to format my references, my citations. That's something that's completely doable in a nice 45-minute window. And you can just sit down and you can work on that. You might say, all right, tonight I need to get a first draft of the first 2 paragraphs. And here's where people get lost whenever they start to do big projects like this. They look for perfection out of the gate. And you cannot go for perfection out of the gate because you're going to hit writer's block. And then when you hit writer's block, now that's when panic starts to set in, because then you're like, I have to turn this in and I have nothing to turn in. Whereas if you think out 6 weeks and then you say, okay, today, as a way to get my brain started, I'm just going to type about X and just open up your laptop and just stream of consciousness, just whatever. And so a lot of times that is a great way to get your brain started in the morning, is to just wake up and just type and just whatever's on your mind. It can be a great way to, it can be very cathartic. You can do it about things that you can set it up as a diary. If you start to get to a point where you're needing to get things done, have it be topics within a paper that you're writing and just say, all right, I'm going to type what I know about this person today or about this topic. And you're just going to go. And eventually what ends up happening, you're going to have usable information. So that's one way. If you look at projects in baby steps, that's going to make things a whole lot easier. Now, that leads us into that next level that we're always talking about. And we're always talking about motivation. What drives you to be who you are? What drives you to get things done? When are you most productive? And the very first thing that I'm going to say about motivation is that you have to be selfish. And what I mean by that is you have to save time for you. You cannot, the human body does not work in a way that you can stay fully engaged 100% of the time for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your body
many try.
Yeah, many try.
I know I've tried.
Right. And I did as well. You know, I've tried that, and what I find is I push myself to the limit to where there's days where I just don't want to do anything. But if I'm much more selfish with my time and I say, okay, here's the time that I'm going to work on these projects today. The other times, I'm going to go watch my daughter play volleyball. Or I'm just going to go out and I'm going to mow the lawn today. You know, it's noon on a Monday and I'm like, I'm going to mow the lawn today.
Oh, hopefully it's not too hot.
Right, but there's projects that have to be done. But you know what? My deadlines, I'm far enough ahead on the deadlines that I can say, you know what? I need time to get away. Mm-hmm. And I just go and I mow the lawn. And it's monotonous. It's boring, you know, but I put on some headphones and by the way, for my birthday this year, my parents bought me a riding mower. So on top of that, I just get to ride a tractor. I don't even have to walk, you know, so there's no effort at all. I'm just out there
driving around
in my beach hat, just kind of riding around on my mower. But but guess what happens when when I start mowing? That's when the ideas come along. And I'm like, oh, I could lesson plan this class. I could use this structure, and it would be so much more effective than what I had planned.
It's just like one of those like in the shower kind of moments when you're just in there. That's when the best ideas happen, right?
That's exactly right. And so sometimes we think of selfish as a negative connotation when it actually isn't. So to maintain that motivation, you have to keep some time for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I like to think of it like what you're saying about being selfish is being a good thing is if you're a teacher and you're dealing with students, but you're not in the right mindset, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're struggling with something and you're just not handling it well, that's going to have a negative impact on your students because you're not going to be the best you can be because you're not taking care of yourself.
Well, and you're not the best you can be, but you're also not modeling what you're expecting from yourself. So when you go in to be a teacher, the most of the people are motivated to teach because they want to help students learn. They want to be there for the students. Well, if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you expect your students to take care of themselves? If you're not following through on your homework, how can you expect your students to follow through on their homework? So part of this process, and one of the things that I would encourage music education majors to do, is when you go through different courses, look at how they're structured. Look at what those expectations are. And then think about what expectations are you going to have for your students? And how are you going to set that up? Because a lot of times your students are going to struggle with these same issues. Your students are going to struggle turning in assignments. They're going to struggle with practice. They're going to struggle with effective practice time. They're going to struggle with the same things that you hear in studio, that you hear in music history, that you hear in music theory, that you hear in rehearsal. They are going to struggle with that. So how do we change that paradigm? How do we model it differently? How do we set them up for success? And I think that all that comes back into that self-motivation. How do we stay motivated? We stay motivated by setting small goals. We don't stay. Now, we have our long-term goals. We talked about that in the first session. But now we have to talk about the realities of how do we meet those goals. And you have to work your way backwards in a series of smaller goals that are sequenced. As
we talked about, just manageable little steps. It's the same as doing your big history paper.
Exactly.
You compartmentalize.
There we
words. You split it up into sections, and you just build towards it. So it's more manageable than it's like, oh man, the goal is to become a great music educator. It's like, well, there's a lot of little steps to get to there.
Absolutely. And so I would say those are some of the biggest ways to maintain that motivation. And also, I mean, in the end, everybody wants to be out there and they want to be teaching. They want to be working with students. They want to be sharing their passion. Mm-hmm. Well, the ways that we do that are to hit these little baby steps along the way. And that can be part of that motivation, is that the light at the end of the tunnel is you being that director and being that point of emphasis for some student somewhere in the state that you teach.
And so kind of going a little bit off of this, outside like the coursework and stuff like that, I know K-State's a little weird than a lot of colleges in the fact we don't have like an early fall break. It's all the way until November when we get our first break. And I know especially with younger students, my younger sister, she's in her freshman year here, and just a lot of other fellow classmates and peers, it's homesickness. That's a huge thing. How?
You know, and this is a great segue into what I wanted to share next, is you have to develop a support network. You have to have friends that you can rely on. And those, and especially, you know, if you're in Kappa Kappa Psi, Tau Beta, if you're in Phi Mu Alpha, Sigma Alpha Iota, Mu Phi Epsilon, any of those professional or social and professional or fraternities, the one thing that you want to focus on is pairing up. So if you're part of NAFME Collegiate, or you're part of one of these other organizations, ACDA, ASTA, anything, think about how can you, if you're in leadership, how can you pair up and have big brother, big sister kind of setup to where you have that you pair them up with people that have been through these processes before. So incoming freshmen, incoming transfer students are paired up with a mentor. And this mentor can be somebody that they can ask questions of, that they know that they can approach, and they can say, all right, how do I approach this? And then develop your support network. If you're a freshman coming in, you seek that out with your mentor, or you talk with people in your section and you say, all right, how can I get connected? You know, find a group that you belong to. And the people that struggle the least with that process are the ones that have established their support network. And this can even get into the homework side of it to maintain the motivation, having an accountability partner.
I'm so very fortunate that, like, with music ed, you know pretty much everyone in your grade level and everything, and it's so helpful to have all their phone numbers and stuff like that. I can message them whenever it's like, oh, hey, what's that assignment? Or, hey, I'm struggling with this. What did you get here? And like what's the process behind that? It's so helpful. And music ed is such a wonderful, like, small kind of close-knit community to where it's great to have those support systems.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, that was one of the things that we noticed in our most recent study when we were looking at student-teacher seminars. and some of the external researchers. So it was myself and Dr. Gergel, and then we had a couple of external researchers from other universities that were a part of this study. And one of the things they remarked on was the way that the students were able to share and to interact, and the very shared community atmosphere that was created. And I think that's, and I'll be fully transparent, that's by design. We set that up from the time that you're here as freshmen. We get you talking with each other. We put you all in the groups together, and then you go through these experiences together. There are shared experiences. When we talk about, and here, this is going to go into specifically with K-State for a little bit, but when we talk about 512 or we talk about 670, people have this notion of what those courses are going to be, but they have it within the context of who they're going to experience it with. And I think that's really important, that we develop that shared support community early on, and then we develop that all the way through all 4 years. And that continues on into the profession, right? So whenever you're in your first years of teaching and you're struggling, and notice I say when you're struggling, because those first years of teaching, they're tough. They are hard.
I have friends right now. As I'm getting older, I have more and more friends who are getting out and teaching. And the people who are in their first year right now, every time I reach out to them, they're just like, I am surviving. That's the term they use.
They're surviving. Well, guess what? This motivation, these techniques that you're developing now are just as important your first years of teaching. Of understanding how to prioritize, understanding how to take time for yourself, understanding how to plan, understanding how to organize, understanding all of these concepts are going to be directly applicable to making your first years of teaching successful. Okay? And yes, they're going to be difficult, but if you build these habits now, then those struggles will be fewer and farther between, and you will have a support structure. We build secret Facebook groups for each one of these communities, and they're still posting in them. They still post in their group me's on a regular basis.
And just talking about the support system, like some of my best friends I made in Theory 1 my freshman year, or the lovely struggle that was oral skills and trying to pass my oral proficiency, having like all these friends who, because they're music students and they're going through the exact same thing you're going through in terms of your coursework, and it's never like huge classes. You just grow really close to each other from whoever and wherever they might be.
Those shared experiences are huge. They really, really are.
So kind of talking a little bit more about motivation and stuff like that, we mentioned your why and kind of the end game. We talked about it a little bit in our first episode, talking about like knowing the end goal, knowing the steps to get there. I read this book actually called Your Why Matters Now by Justin Jones Fasu, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which was a really cool kind of shorter book that just focused on like you figuring out what your why is and kind of understanding it's like everything you do in life, from your personal life to your professional life to whatever, it needs to be geared towards your why. And figuring out your why, like for instance, right now, like my why, which is something that can change over the course of your life, is my why is I'm doing this because I want to be the best music educator I can be, and I want to provide a great education for my future students and to continue to prepare the next generation. That's kind of the why of where I'm doing it, and I think there's a lot of students, especially younger students, and even older students, who don't entirely know their why at times. I talked to Jacob Sweat. He's the person who I interviewed for the second episode of the In the Practice Room thing we're doing on YouTube. He talked about he didn't come here as a music ed major, and that it took him a lot of thought after that first semester. He was a business major, and he's like waking up and he's not really enjoying it. He's just wondering, why am I doing this? What's the reasoning behind this? and it took them a while to establish. I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is why. I'm passionate about this, and just it's okay to not always know where you want, but that's where that support group comes in. People who know you very well, and it's not just your friends who you make in your music classes or in your ensembles. Don't forget about your family either. A lot of people, their family is the first support system. Just talking to people you know who know you about, it's like, do I seem happy and stuff like that? Because I know sometimes I can't identify, like, I might think like I'm really kind of chugging along and enjoying things, but other people are like, you seem like you're struggling with that, and it's a heart check kind of moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and having those people there to support you and for you to trust them to a point where they can share that with you, that is really important. The other thing that I would say is, what are the most effective habits? So once you've identified your why, then we have to look at what are the habits of successful people. What are habits of people that are truly engaged in what they do on a daily basis? And so I think once you know your why, then we identify, well, how do we get there?
Yeah, how do you get there? You said habits of successful people. There's a book that
Stephen Covey, 7 Habits.
Every single director I've ever met, I still need to read it,
mm-hmm.
has recommended that book, from Paula Kreider, Frank Troika,
and he's written several others that are kind of extensions of that. So I highly recommend it. I mean, it's a fantastic book to read, and one future episode, I'd really like to spend some time on leadership too.
Oh yeah.
And talking about that, because many of us as future music teachers, we're going to be leading large groups of people.
We're going to be leading and teaching people how to lead.
Exactly, and so understanding the fundamentals of leadership is going to be a fantastic topic, because it's something that even some of our students that go out there to become teachers are not necessarily leaders per se. They're not like at the front of the group, but they're leading from the middle, or they're leading from the back. And there's ways that they are engaged in leadership that may not be visible to just a casual observer. And so we need to have those conversations.
Oh yeah.
And so I think, but we first have to figure out why we're doing what we're doing. We have to figure out, all right, what are the habits we have to develop to become effective deliverers of that content.
And I think bringing it back to kind of where it started sometimes. I know with music, there's a lot of people who can think of a very specific moment, whether it's something with their high school band director or a piece they played. For me, the piece that I remember that I'm like, man, music is really, really stinking cool, was I played a piece called Passages by Michael Sweeney.
Mm-hmm.
It was my freshman year of high school. I'd never taken band very seriously or anything. I'm like, oh, it's fun. I have friends in there, and I'd show up. I played my French horn really poorly. I apologize to my directors, Mr. Bartley and Mr. Hollingsworth, for not giving a better effort through middle school and back at that time. But playing that piece, I'm just like, wow. It had a really cool and fun horn part. There was like an amazing sax solo, and just playing that piece and listening to that piece, I'm like, this is really cool. Music is like super great. And side note, I had a great opportunity. I went to the Con Selmer Institute over this last summer, and I got to meet Michael Sweeney and be conducted by Michael Sweeney in one of the reading bands they had. Got a picture with him. I felt like a complete dork in terms of like how probably someone would approach like a professional athlete or something like that. Someone probably a little bit more well known across the world than Michael Sweeney, but I was just like, oh my goodness, this is the person who's the reason I'm in music, and so cool.
That is awesome, and we all have that. We all have that moment. And for me, it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint, because you talk about specific piece that kind of like resonated with you, and mine was at different points for different reasons, right? So I would probably say in high school it would probably come down to my first Christmas concert, and we did Russian Christmas music. And number one, I think, looking back, yes, it resonated with me, but it resonated because I got to play really loud.
I mean, you're a trombone
I'm
player.
a trombone
right?
player.
So that's like half the things for
that's
trombone,
exactly
right.
We had a good time with that. But, and then it becomes a question of, okay, was it the music? Was it the people that, at that point, I'm still really good friends with all the people in that section, And so I still talk to them. Well, we're definitely Facebook friends, and I chat with them, fairly regularly. So was it that connection that we had? Was it that shared experience of that moment? In college, it's still one of the most moving. There were two moments. Number one, Elsa's procession to the cathedral was a fantastic musical moment for me when we played it. But Power of Rome and the Christian Heart by Granger, unbelievable. It's organ and wind ensemble.
Always a great combination.
Right.
I played a piece by Alfred Reed that I can't remember what
Ali
it was.
Aladamuste.
Yes.
Yep. So, I mean, at that point, it's then figure out how to help them make those connections. So.
That's really exciting. And I'm so very fortunate just to have a lot of these connections. And we've kind of mentioned it a little bit throughout our podcast, but a very important aspect of keeping your motivation up and reducing your stress is being selfish. It's taking care of yourself and doing everything you need to do. I know one thing that really gets pushed off the wayside as we're procrastinating on our assignments, we're waiting till after the concert or whatever to start working on things, is sleep sometimes becomes a secondary concern to a lot of us, and it's really self kind of defeating kind of thing when you push back sleep to like study for that test.
And keep in mind, the less sleep that you get, the less productive your brain is going to work. Your brain has to, so whenever you sleep, what ends up happening is neurologically it starts reorganizing your brain, so that when you wake up, the reason you feel fresh is because your body has reorganized everything that has been swimming around in your head all day. And think about it as a computer going to sleep. It's working in the background to organize all the data files that you've been adding throughout the day, and is trying to optimize performance. Your brain's doing the exact same thing. If you take that away from your body, you're going to struggle. And so when you're tired, it's going to be hard to stay engaged in class. When you're tired, it's hard to focus in on an assignment and do your best work. So sleep is by far one of the most important things you can do. Sleep and drinking water.
Oh yeah.
So hydration and sleep. Regardless of the latest research that was out there that said water was number 10.
I saw that on CNN. I'm like,
yeah.
I clicked on the article. I'm like, this is weird, but it's like water's still the best. It's just other things technically hydrate you, but it doesn't last as long as water does.
And I think I want to say diet soda was like near the
number
top.
one.
Number one.
And I'm like, that's like the worst possible thing to like. I want to go to marching band rehearsal, drinking Diet Coke or whatever throughout rehearsal to keep well hydrated. That would not end well.
I mean, there's water in it, but I don't know that it's necessarily. But I say that with the idea of you should hydrate and you should get as much sleep as possible, because those are the two main things that will help maintain your focus for longer periods of time.
I know there's a lot of people who are always like, you need 8 hours of sleep, and for a lot of college students, that's not always possible between a lot of the work you have to do and whether you actually have a job and stuff like that. Sometimes it's a little hard, and that's okay to not be getting the 8 hours. I personally, I try to aim for 6, I think, is the minimum in which you need to operate.
Well, and here's where I'm going to say know your sleep habits. Because for me, because of the way my sleep cycle works, if I get an even hour numbers of sleep, then I will be fine the next day. Now, I would not say, hey, I'm going to go on 2 hours of sleep for an entire month. But if I get 2 hours of sleep, I can be functioning at almost full power the next day. Now, I'm going to have to catch those.
You have to catch it up.
I have to catch that up somewhere. But if I get 4 hours to sleep, so if I'm about ready to go to sleep and I look at, okay, I've got to wake up at 5:30 tomorrow morning. If I'm sitting at midnight, there's absolutely no way I'm going to sleep. I'm going to stay up another hour and a half until 1:30 so that I can get 4 hours of sleep. And the reason is because I know my body. And I understand that if I get 5 hours of sleep, I'm going to be dragging, and I'm not going to be very pleasant to be around, because I'm going to be struggling just to get through the day. So I want to make sure that I'm at peak volume all the way. So the way I do that is I've learned over the years, this is what my body requires. And I think that's the most important part.
Everyone's individual.
Exactly. Know your own sleep cycles. And plan your sleep just like you plan homework, because some people can't take naps during the day because then they can't sleep at night. So understand how your body works. Understand your sleep cycles, because we do know that sleep is significantly related to anxiety and depression.
Yes.
As the amount of sleep goes down and you become sleep deprived, the symptoms of anxiety and depression begin to increase. And we know that. So we have to be aware of that as we go through, which then brings us to that next level of, you have to be aware of your mental health. And the one thing, and we're having this conversation in research class yesterday, because we're doing another investigation into music education majors and mental health. For those that are listening, be on the lookout for an email from Kansas State University, because we are going to do this study again, because we want to look back and we want to see, has anything changed?
Is this going to be across multiple colleges?
It'll be another nationwide survey like we did 2 years ago. Our initial study is going to be published in the next month in Journal of Music Teacher Education. So we've got a lot of interesting findings that are going to be in the record now of how music education majors perceive their mental health. The one thing, and where I was going with this line of comments, is that a lot of times we use the word mental as illness instead of health. Mm-hmm. And understanding, we need to be more aware of if we're not acting like ourselves. Because there are moments, and you even mentioned it, you said, I felt like I'm normal, but somebody says, are you struggling? And then I think back, well, maybe I am.
Yeah.
And so we have to be more aware of that. You also mentioned earlier in the podcast, you said about the McCain plague. Well, you have to understand when you're getting sick. We all know we have like this feeling in our nose, or we'll get an ache in a joint and we'll be like, oh, here comes bronchitis. You know that it's going to happen. You have to do the same thing with your mental health.
I very vividly remember, I think it was my sophomore year, I was coming down with my annual case of bronchitis, and I'm like, nah, it's just allergies. It's allergies. And this goes back to having a great support group. 3 of my friends who are also horn players, as I was going into my lesson, one of them was walking out, we were just all hanging out. They forced me to be like, you need to go to the doctor, and told my horn professor, it's like, he needs to go to the doctor. So my horn professor told me if I go to the doctor, I will get an A for my lesson that day. So sometimes your friends have really great intention. You might not want to admit things, but your friends are always there looking out for you.
Absolutely. And I think it's just as important that we be as in tune with our mental health as we are our physical health.
Yeah, there's so many people who it's such a stigma right now, which it shouldn't be. Taking care of yourself physically, like people go to the gym all the time, people go to the doctor for a cold all the time. I don't think it's any different with mental health struggles.
It's not. And the other side of this is that, and I will repeat this statistic until nobody will listen to me anymore. But what the researchers and what the research has shown is that one of the number one reasons that students don't seek help is because of that stigma. But do you realize that 94% of college students do not think less of those that seek help for mental health? So we're talking about, it's almost unanimous that nobody's going to think any less for you to go get well, because they think of it, just like you said, as going to the doctor. Yet we have this
fear.
This fear, this hang up that we don't want to go to see somebody because we think that we're admitting a weakness. And it's not a weakness at all. It literally is just another it's another sickness that we're having to go get treated like we would a sprained ankle or a bronchitis.
Yeah, and I know this was something I struggled more as I was younger, and I've gotten more comfortable with that as I've grown up and stuff and gone through the years. But like freshman, sophomore year, whenever like I was really struggling with something, it's something like I'm like I can't let people know I'm struggling, or else they're gonna think like I don't belong here or something like that, or they're gonna think weirdly of me. But as kind of like going on through my junior then and into now my senior year, I'm just like, no, it's okay, and I think it's our responsibility to try to be honest about it for those people who are afraid to talk about it. I'm very open now. It's like whenever someone asks me how my day is, instead of the automatic response, oh yeah, I'm doing good. If I'm not having a good day, I'll be like, I'm struggling a little bit today. I think it'll be okay, but I'm just having a little bit of a rough day.
Yeah, and I think being able to be open and honest about that is huge. And I also think being able to come to terms with not every day's a good day.
Oh yeah. There are definitely some days which are not good days.
And it's okay to share that. And the fact that you're able to share that's a huge step forward, and getting everybody okay and willing to share that. And the fact that you, looking back now, could tell your freshman self those seniors are having the same struggles as you are. So speak up. Because somebody will be there to take you under their wing.
They sat in that same oral skills class not understanding what solfege was or how to properly sing a tritone. They know that struggle. They know the struggle of being away from home for the first time, for such an extended period of time. And this goes back to, once again, the support system we have, which we're very, very fortunate to have. And I think especially older students and people in that support system should be on the lookout for your friends. As we mentioned, if someone's having a rough day or they're not talking much or something like that, and they're the person who might enjoy just a little bit of company, I'm try to be very deliberate about asking someone. It's like, hey, you want to go get some coffee or whatever, and just like, I'm not talking about like music or things like that. Just it's like, how are you, or how just what are you up to, and things like that. Just catching up a little bit. And I know the people who I've met with about that are very appreciative about that. And sometimes we don't talk about music at all, or the next concert or whatever we're dealing with. It's just, how are you?
And that's another great point with mental well-being and mental health through this whole process. As we begin to get into the profession, number one out of every two teachers entering the profession will leave within the first 5 years. It's a very high attrition rate. They burn out very quickly. And one of the things that can happen with music instructors especially is that we are so involved in music itself that, number one, we have a hard time separating our performer side from our teacher side. And so the two get conflated, and then we don't meet our expectations as a performer, which then we see as a failure as a teacher, which then, it creates all sorts of internal struggles. And then we're back to square one, and we're like, well, maybe I'm not a good teacher, I'm leaving the profession. Or we have all of these administrative duties, and then we realize, well, teaching is only about 10% of my job. Or making music is only like 10% of my job. The other 90%, I'm sitting around fundraising. I'm filling out reports. I'm doing things that have nothing to do with it. So there's so many different factors that play into this idea of burnout, and just low pay has something else to do with it, right? So one of the things that I would say is that you have to find a hobby outside of music. You have to have something where you can just cut completely loose, disconnect, and go do something. For me, it's golf. Well, it was golf until I had kids, and now it's running because running is cheap.
Running is cheap, and the few times I have tried golfing, it's not a very pretty shot ever. It's fun, but it's not. I'm not good at it.
So I mean, those are my ways to disconnect. I can go to the driving range, or I can just go out and I can run. This morning I ran 5 miles, and that whole time, I'm just thinking about just life things. Teaching and music didn't even come up once. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about everything else. So that ability to clear your head and to just get away is huge.
And I will say, like, some of the happiest people I've seen in this profession just have perfected kind of that balance. I had the opportunity to meet Dean Westman, and he's just absolutely one of the most happiest, joyful individuals I've ever met, and he's running such an amazing program at Avon and mm-hmm. everything he's done with the Blue Coats and both their marching band at Avon and the orchestra and concert ensembles. But he's such just a joyful individual who you wouldn't know was running such a really strong program just because he's really down to earth, and he doesn't talk about music all the time. He just talks about his life or his daughter or his family sometimes, mm-hmm. and it's just really cool.
And that's a huge thing to remember, is that there has to be a balance. That balance is key. You have to understand. Again, it comes back to selfishness. You have to. There was something else that stuck out to me too, is that understand the amount of time that you have to give. Your time is your time, and there's a finite amount of it. And that sometimes if you tell somebody, I don't have the time to do that right now, it doesn't mean that every single minute is completely taken up. It just means that you don't have any more time.
You need time or time to do your homework or something like that.
Exactly. And sometimes that's, I need to go sit and binge Netflix for a little while, because I need to completely not think about anything.
What's your go-to on Netflix?
Oh, man. Right now, I am catching up on Breaking Bad, because a week from Friday, the Jesse Pinkman, the sequel to Breaking Bad, they're going to chronicle, it's a 2-hour movie, and I'm trying to remember what it's called, but they're going to chronicle what happened to Jesse Pinkman at the end of Breaking Bad, and it comes out October 11th.
I'm very big The Office watcher. I think I've watched that. It's what's gotten me through college. I've watched it 10 times since I've been here in college.
So The Office, I mean, that is a great go-to. My daughter is on her 6th time through, so now she and I have all of these inside jokes. Oh, absolutely. And so we'll try and throw in a quote to make each other laugh in serious situations.
Yeah.
And so we'll try and so every time we're trying to throw each other off with quotes, and it's just really, really funny. Right now I'm working my way through, I had said Breaking Bad, but The Blacklist. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a James Spader show, and it's pretty good.
I'm very much sitcom guy. I just started watching The Good Place, which is
that pretty good?
It's absolutely hilarious.
I haven't watched much with Ted Danson since Cheers. So I used to watch Cheers, and this is gonna sound funny. I used to watch it with my grandpa growing up, and so I was in Boston this summer, and I went by Cheers. And I, took my picture with the sign. I mean, it was fantastic. So,
anyways, before people start thinking that we're turning into a Netflix show review podcast, kind of back on the topic of taking care of yourself. We haven't mentioned eating.
Right. You have to eat healthily. I mean, if we've watched Super Size Me, we understand that eating McDonald's
I remember watching that in health class in high school.
It's not great for you, right? So one of the things that I would say is pack healthy snacks with you. And if you start to feel like you're getting sluggish or hungry, carry some almonds with you. If you have a nut allergy, find a little snack that you can have with you that you can just eat. And when you eat, don't like scarf it down. Take your time, eat it.
Have like a little 30-minute break in your day to enjoy a meal
and savor it. Right. Don't try and throw it back. Now, are there times when you're going to have to? Absolutely. But you can still not letting yourself go hungry and skipping meals is much worse.
And I know a big thing for students as they get out of the dorms and stuff like that. Sometimes grocery shopping can be a really scary experience that your mom's made seem way easier than it actually is. And for that, I recommend call your parents. Ask your mom, like, what's your grocery store plan and stuff like that. What did you used to buy and things like that? Because I know the first few times whenever I went grocery shopping by myself, I'm like, I don't know where to start. I was going around the entire store and I was loading up on the absolute quality stuff of like ramen, frozen pizzas, and all that quick to make easy stuff.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot to be said with ramen. You can be very creative with ramen.
Oh, yeah.
And it's super cheap, right? But the Tony's pizzas, that's when it,
those sit in your stomach.
But still, I mean, yeah. So you want to be smart about what you're putting in, and think about it as, I mean, fuel. So if you're putting in bad fuel, you're not gonna get the most out of it.
Yeah, the engine's gonna start sputtering eventually.
I consider daily vitamins. Daily vitamins are also helpful on maintaining health. Vitamin C. Yes, some of this might be placebo, but you know what? Any help at this time of year. And so just remember that and eat when you're hungry. So have snacks along. So if you feel it starting to hit, go ahead and eat. It's okay.
I know with your schedule and stuff, it can be hard to always be like making yourself food. And I found something that's very helpful to me and a lot of people I've talked to is doing meal prepping. It's something that, like, if you divvy up, once again, being a little bit selfish for yourself and divvying up like a couple hours on Sunday night or something like that to make yourself lunches for the week, so that way you have something you can just like throw in the microwave that's not like really bad for you, or you're not just going to Burger King across the street, which is a really great location for a Burger King, is to be right by a college, but don't be tempted.
Right. Although they did just remodel, so that's, I mean, and they have
cool and hip.
They have a touchscreen, soda fountain now. So anyway, I digress again.
Anyways, just doing that meal prep of like making easy to make food that you can make in bulk, like rice and chicken, is honestly my saving grace in most things.
Absolutely, and I think the meal prep, eating well, sleep, accountability partners, all of this is huge, and it gets back to our initial topic of motivation. And what that comes down to is that you're just thinking ahead, and you're planning ahead, and think of your goals for the end of the semester in smaller chunks. And if you can think of that in smaller steps and maintain that momentum and moving forward, and constantly finding your own strategies that work for hitting those little landmarks. And if you hit the landmarks, those small ones, the large ones are going to follow. So it's just a matter of staying the course and having your friends there to support you along the way.
It's just all about what you just said, keeping together and everything, and constantly working to keep that motivation up, using that support system, keeping yourself healthy, and being selfish.
Right. Yeah, and be honest with yourself. Don't hide it from yourself, because that's very easy to do.
Very easy to do.
We can all say, it's not bothering me. It's not bothering me. I'll be fine.
I'll
be fine. Or oh yeah, I've got 2 hours tomorrow. I'll work on this project tomorrow. No, you know yourself. You know yourself, and you know that you're not going to do that tomorrow. You know that you're just putting it off because you don't want to deal with it today, and that's where it becomes a major issue. So be honest with yourself, set up realistic plans. Don't set up anything that is pie in the sky. Make it realistic. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to know yourself and make goals that are attainable, because the worst kind of goals are the goals that are not attainable, and then you think, well, I can't meet it anyway, so I'm just going to throw in the towel. So make the goals that are attainable. Be honest with yourself. Know yourself. Get enough sleep. Drink lots of water, and build your network. And those are the keys to success.
Well put.
So, again, we're not your Forte podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcasts.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere. Check out our YouTube channel. Eric's got a great In the Practice Room episodes as well. Episodes 1 and 2 are up. Check us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Any way that you want to get in touch with us there. We'd love to hear your comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. Be sure to rate us 5 stars, and make sure that you're sending your questions to us, because we want to be able to cover the topics that you want to cover. So yeah, we're going to cover leadership. We're going to cover all sorts of different topics, but we want to know what's on your mind. So send your feedback to us. If you got any questions or suggestions, email them to notyourfortepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's notyourfortepodcast@gmail.com. We're extending the composition contest for another 2 weeks. Please get your compositions in. We want to feature your music on our podcast. 15 to 20 seconds of music, and the winner is going to get a Chick-fil-A gift card for $20. Next topic for our next podcast is going to be about your identity as a music teacher. And we're going to call this Putting on Your Teacher Hat, and understanding that it's different than putting on our performer hat and how we interact with music. So we're going to spend some time on strategies and approaches that you can employ to develop yourself as a teacher while you're working on yourself as a musician. Thanks for listening, and anything else you want to share, Eric?
Thank you so much for all the great support. I know Dr. Payne and I both greatly appreciate it, and like I said, just share it with your friends, and hopefully we'll keep doing this and keep having fun doing it.
Absolutely. See you all next time.